Welcome, everyone. And today we have with us Rachel Lee. She's a personal brand coach on a mission to help creatives, coaches, and consultants to build a personal brand that looks and feels just like you because you are the brand. And today's topic is about the power of vulnerability and how you actually use it to connect with your audience. So now I'm going to give it to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Dana, for the lovely introduction. It's always weird when you hear people talking about you in third person. It's like, oh, wow, every time I walk into the room, it would be awesome if somebody introduced me like that. But yes, as Dana shared, I am a personal brand coach. I'm based in Vancouver, Canada, on the West Coast. So for me, it's morning, and wherever else you guys are in the world, probably afternoon or evening. And I work together with mostly solopreneurs to create an online brand presence that looks exactly like you. Oftentimes, that means I get to have conversations with people that sound something like, hey, so tell me about you. What are you like? And most people list off a bunch of amazing things. They say like, I'm funny and I'm smart and all of the good things. And I'm like, okay, that's awesome. So what are you like on a bad day? And then suddenly either two things happen. One, they go quiet, or two, they start listing out a bunch of things that weren't on the original list. And I think that's interesting because oftentimes we have this side of us that we don't talk about a lot. In fact, most of us try to hide it, especially in a professional setting. And even though it is a part of us and it's totally normal for us to not want to bring it to light, it's oftentimes kind of shunned in society to talk about your weaknesses, share about things that are hard to talk about. But over the years of having worked together with people on their brands, including my own, I've discovered that trying to hide or cover these things up results in what we call having a flat brand, being one dimensional as a person. Like, I'm sure you guys have all met that person where whenever you chat with them and you ask them, how are you doing? Their answer is always doing good. And then that's it. There's not a whole lot else going on in their life, even though we know that we're all human, none of us are perfect. And it is most likely because they're not ready to talk about those things. They don't trust you enough and they're not ready to open up. But since we're all human, I think it's worth a discussion to see if there's a way that we can embrace this side of us instead of running away from it and find ways to use it to create connection with the people around us. And especially in the world of business where we seem to face this strange pressure of needing to show up perfectly all the time. I think that it's important for us to talk about this topic. And so I'm going to preface this by saying that we're going to be talking about a difficult topic, maybe especially for the guys in the room. I know for girls, it's whatever the reason is, society says it's okay for you to be vulnerable. It's okay to be soft. But then for guys, I know the message is slightly different. But if you're down to play with me today, can I get a thumbs up from everyone to let me know that we're ready to go? We're okay to talk about something a little sensitive. Okay, awesome. And so today we're going to be talking about a bit of a scary word for most people, and that is vulnerability. And I actually wanted to hear from you guys actually in the chat. When I say this word, what initially comes up? If it's like a thought or a feeling, maybe what it means to you. You could just type a few words or maybe a sentence just to get a few ideas going first, because I know that this might be something that is uncomfortable for people. And so yeah, like if you could type just like a few words, one or two things in the chat, that would be awesome. And so Lily says feelings, showing up as you really are. Aya says letting people in. Yes, totally. And it definitely involves opening yourself up. And as we know, sometimes we don't feel safe to do that, right? Allison says being honest. Yes. And it's funny because like being unapologetically yourself and not worrying about what other people think of you, it sounds easy, like when we type it down, you're like, oh yeah, it's so easy. Just be honest, tell people the truth. But it's actually not that simple, right? If it was that simple, we would all do it. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And so today we're going to be going over a few things. So the first thing is we're going to talk about what vulnerability is, the definition of it. We're going to talk about why are we so scared of it? What's so scary? What are the risks, let's call them that, of being vulnerable? We're going to talk about why is it important for us to consider this in the world of business where everything is, we have this weird pressure to show up as perfect all the time. We're going to talk about what gets in the way of us showing up that way. And then we're going to talk about how can we overcome these roadblocks. And so leading into today's talk, I wanted to get a quick show of hands to see if any of you have done a few of these things. And so you can raise your physical or digital hand. I know we're on Zoom now. If you have done some kind of public speaking before, if you've like stood in front of a crowd, done a podcast interview, any sort of activity that involves people staring at you and not really responding. Show of hands. Okay, cool. How many of you have ever needed to ask someone for help? Show of hands. Okay, cool. I actually suck at this. So I hesitate whenever I'm like, oh geez, yes, I do ask for help sometimes. Okay, how many of you have tried something new before? And this could be anything. Could be trying a new hobby, doing something for the first time. Yes. Okay. And last question. Have any of you ever told somebody that you loved them? It could be verbally telling them, it could be gesture of love. Okay, we can work on that. That's totally cool. And so congratulations. That means if any of you have raised your hand at least once, it means that you have experienced being vulnerable. And the reason why I listed all of these things out is because I wanted to actually reframe what the word vulnerable means. Most of us associate the word vulnerability with crying on camera or sharing your feelings, but it's actually a lot more than that. And I'm actually just going to read out the Google definition of vulnerability. It sounds kind of scary, but according to Google, or the Oxford definition of vulnerability, it is the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. It sounds really terrible when I read it out. No wonder we're scared of it, right? But going back to my list of examples from above, like trying something new, for example, puts you at risk of making a fool of yourself. What if you're not good at it? You know, telling somebody that you love is being vulnerable, because what if they don't love you back? What if they don't reciprocate? What if they reject you? You know, like showing love is actually a huge show of vulnerability, and it's actually really difficult. And so, can I get a few nods if you guys are following along? That makes sense, right? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. And the funny thing is that this definition, the dictionary definition, makes vulnerability sound really bad when it actually isn't. Unfortunately, we are taught differently in society, whether it's told to us like, hey, like, even if you're scared, just show up, just do it. You know, don't tell people, don't let them see that you're scared. Or even just by observing the people around us growing up, you can sort of get the messages that it's not okay to show weakness. And so I wanted to share a personal story, because the theme of the summit is sharing some personal stories about what the messages were for me growing up about vulnerability. And so a little background on me: I came from an Asian household. Both of my parents are from Hong Kong, but I was born here in Canada. And there's this thing in Asian culture where people, especially my parents' generation, older generation, they're not super expressive with their feelings, especially if there's, you know, like anything negative, like if they're sad, they're angry, they're upset, they're jealous. You don't ever see any of that. And so growing up, I actually have a hard time recalling a moment when I've actually like visibly observed when my parents weren't doing okay, weren't happy, weren't doing well. And it's not like they didn't go through hardship. You know, we all know everyone goes through stuff, but they just never let it show to me. And you know what signals that those signals that were sent to me as a kid was that, well, if I was doing okay, then I shouldn't talk about it because one, that's what all the grown-ups were doing. Two, I was worried that no one would understand me. And three, that if I talked about it, then it would bring down the mood and it would turn me into burden because everyone around me seemed to be okay. So if I was the one that wasn't okay, that means there's something wrong with me. And so growing up, that meant I was terrible at talking about my problems. Whenever people ask me, how are you doing? I'm like, good, you, the default answer. I was always happy go lucky. And the thing that was really hard for me, and I mentioned it earlier, is that I sucked at asking for help. I took pride in being super self-sufficient, and it's something that I'm still working through to this day. And I wanted to get a show of hands to see if any of you struggle with that as well. I think especially asking for help, it's hard because it means that you have to admit, I don't got this. I need help. And there's a part of you that you actually have to let go in order to do that. And I'm still working on that to this day. And so I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one. Yay for vulnerability. Connections happening already, right? And so I actually wanted to circle back to the definition of vulnerability that we talked before, and I wanted to propose a healthier definition for it. And so if any of you have ever heard of Brene Brown before, she's one of my heroes. She's a well-known American researcher, speaker, author, and she spent her life's work studying the topics of shame, vulnerability, and leadership. It's a really interesting topic, but she actually has a definition of vulnerability that I really, really like. And it's similar to the Google one, but with something extra on top. And so according to Brene Brown, she says vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, but vulnerability is not weakness. It's our most accurate measure of courage. And because it's such an awesome quote, I'm actually going to copy and paste that into the chat here if you guys want to save it for later. And so let that sink in for a second. The first half of it, yeah, Google covered it. It's scary, like you can get hurt, but it's not weakness because it takes courage. It takes courage to tell somebody that you love them. It takes courage to try something new, And I feel like this very small shift in perspective is actually very helpful for us because when you decide to reframe it, courage is actually an excellent quality for us to have, and that's something that I feel that we can and should bring more of into our lives. And so that's a very small shift in perspective, but I think it would be really good for us to focus on that. And so, of course, you can't show courage without talking about fear, can't have courage in the absence of fear. And so I wanted to talk for a second about what's so scary about showing vulnerability. And if you guys can maybe drop a few words in the chat about what are some things that actually keep you or hold you back from showing vulnerability. What are the things that you're scared of? It could be like one word answers or a sentence or two. Rejection, judgment. Even as I read these words, I'm thinking back to like elementary school days of like, oh, what if the other kids don't like me? That loss of reputation, appearing weak. Like being hired again. Not being hurt again. Yeah, not being accepted. Yes to all of these. And it's scary, even if you go back to just our human psychology. Back then, whenever we were rejected or outcast from our tribe, like we were hunter gatherers, like we existed in clans. And whenever somebody was rejected or outcast, that meant you would get eaten by a bear because you don't have friends to protect you, right? And so the primal part of our brain is primed to be like, if people reject me, if people don't accept me, that is a threat to my survival. And of course, nowadays, I don't think any of you are living in the jungle. And if you're outcast, like it's not certain life or death, but our brain registers it as that, And I actually wanted to talk about the business equivalent of that, because of course, in the world of business, you're putting yourself out there, making connections with people so that you can do an exchange and earn money, right? But what happens in the world of business when you when you put yourself out there vulnerably? You might be perceived as unprofessional. I've been called that before by sharing my feelings. You might run the risk of having people not take you seriously. They're like, what kind of professional shares about their personal stuff, you know? Someone mentioned it earlier about ruining your reputation. Like, what if you make a fool of yourself and then people leave a bunch of bad reviews on your Google page or whatever, you know, or scaring away clients. And all of these, basically, the risk is if you ruin your reputation, people aren't going to want to work with you. You're not going to make money. That's sort of like the bottom line in business. And that's what scares a lot of us away from using vulnerability in our business. But I wanted to talk about the flip side of it, and actually ask this question of how many of you have landed yourself a client by listening to them share about their struggle and actually just saying, hey, I'm sorry you're going through this. I've been there myself before and it sucked. I know exactly how you're feeling and I also got out of it. Would you like some help with this? I would be happy to support you in your struggle. You know, like, and a lot of clients would actually be like, heck yes, like, oh my God, they understand me. Like, it's that me too factor. And it's I want to make it clear too that this is different from just, you know, knowing your clients pain points. You know, we all do this in the world of business where it's like, oh yes, like, do you struggle with this and this? If so, here's my five-day free challenge. This will solve all your problems. You know, I think it's actually different from that because your clients actually, they already know what their problems are. What they actually want is to hear that you understand them. You know, like in the age of Google, everybody, it like all of the solutions that we actually want to solve our problems are available for free. You don't even need to pay for Wi-Fi, honestly, nowadays. To like, you can just Google it, you know, you can Google all of your problems away. But what people are actually looking for nowadays aren't actually just solutions. They're looking to feel seen, heard, and understood. And the moment you help your clients feel that, there's a high likelihood that they're also going to be willing to buy from you. You know, like once you have that connection, once you have that trust, chances are people are going to be much more willing to reach into their wallet and give you their money. So it's not like showing vulnerability isn't just like a soft, squishy thing. It actually directly converts. If I talk in like a business fashion, it actually directly converts into dollars for your business afterwards. Now, there is this problem in the world of business where we seem to have a really hard time showing vulnerability. And, you know, take a look at the advertising industry, you'll see what I mean. You know, look at me, I'm an expert. I'm the best at what I do. I have 25 years of experience. I have 50 million degrees and I've like spoken around the world. Check out my services. I'm better than the rest of the competition. Everyone's like bragging about how great and how awesome they are, but no one ever talks about the other stuff. You know, it's like, how did you get to that point? You know, what were the struggles? What were the challenges? Nobody ever talks about those things. They just talk about what their successes are. And the trend nowadays is, you know, with all these online influencers, the trend is to make ourselves look bigger and better than we actually are. And it kind of leads us down this slippery slope of something I call guru-itis. I should turn that into a dictionary definition. But basically, it's this trap that a lot of people fall into where they have this super perfect image around themselves and they make themselves appear untouchable. And, you know, so you hesitate to send them a message because they're too big or they're too busy to help you with their problems. Like you're almost scared of reaching out, even though you think that they have the solution for your problem. And guess what? That's terrible for business because now, congratulations, you've got a bunch of people following you, but they're all holding themselves back from actually connecting with you because of the way that you're putting yourself out there. And I mean, it's good to have a lot of eyeballs on your stuff, but it's also bad because people are scared of talking to you now, you know? And so it's always like two sides of the coin with vulnerability where you have these brands like Gary Vee, you know, you present yourself a certain way. It's like, oh, I know everything. I'm the tough guy, you know? But what if somebody's really struggling and they need help and they want to work with you? Are they going to feel safe enough to open up to you, or are they going to be afraid that they're going to receive some kind of lashback or judgment or just not have a response? Right. And so Now the question is, well, how do we bake vulnerability into our brand without looking weak or unprofessional? And so I wanted to get a few, just get a few of you dropping some thoughts into the chat about this, whether if it's something that you've tried before in the past, or you've maybe seen someone else do it. What are some ways that you've seen people showing vulnerability, maybe even in the world of business, or even just in general? I feel like the lines are sort of blurring nowadays. What does vulnerability look like? When people show it let's say in the online space, everything's online now, so you can like drop a few words or drop a few ideas, and then we can have a little discussion afterwards about yeah, like what is it like, are these things easy to do, what keeps us back from it? Yeah, if you guys have any ideas, would love to hear them. This is also a harder question, so if you don't have any ideas, that's totally cool. Yeah, he says being approachable and personable. Um, yeah, being weak, and it's interesting because being weak can you could be vulnerable without being weak. I think we can talk about that as well. I'll even put in yeah, being authentic, and yeah, showing our humanness, admitting that you don't know the answer to a question. Yeah, dude, that's huge. And even nowadays in the world of business, we have this pressure to feel like we have the answers to everything, and and we end up making things up and causing more harm, than actually just saying like, hey, I actually don't know, I don't have experience with this, but I can either one, direct you to somebody who knows better, or let me Google that, do some cross referencing, and let me get back to you. Yeah, but these are all actually really amazing ideas. And so I actually wanted to share a few other ideas about different ways that you can show vulnerability, and just experiment with it. One of the things that I am a huge advocate for is sharing the process. Me being, I have a design background, so I went to art school, and the thing that they taught us outside of how to make beautiful things is always document and show the process of you coming up with the final product. Always, in fact, they actually graded us for more for showing the process and how well we documented it rather than the final product. Like they graded us like 20% for the final project, 80% on how well did you do your process. That's how much of an emphasis there is. And it, of course, this looks different for the type of work that you do. For me with design, it's very easy. It's just at every like checkpoint, I just take a snapshot and then I share. It's like, hey, here's version 1, here's version 2. But I know that also in the world of coaching, what if you talk for a living? What if you're writing a book? Sharing the process could look a little bit different. It could even just be saying like, hey, I know that I said that I'm writing a book, I'm halfway through and I'm feeling stuck right now. So I'm going to take myself out for a walk. I'm going to get some inspiration and we'll come back to it and see how it goes. And so sharing the process could even just be saying like, hey, I'm partway through. This is how I'm doing. This is what's going on. This is what I'm struggling with. And I don't know what the end product's going to look like, but I'm going to start sharing about it anyway. So sharing the process is one really good way that we can bake vulnerability into our brand without being super upfront about like, oh, I'm sharing my feelings. And because that's not weak, it's just bringing people along on the journey, right? So that's one way that you can get your audience involved. Another one is like you can show up even on the hard days. And I know what a lot of people say. It's like, oh, like, does that mean I have to cry on camera? Does that mean that I have to like, what about personal boundaries? And for this, I wanted to share something that one of my mentors passed down to me that was super, super helpful. And it's that there's a difference between what's private and what's personal. And so when you start sharing, for example, you can talk about how you had a bad day. everyone can relate to that. It's like, I had a bad day. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I know what bad days are like. I hope you're doing okay. That's something that's personal, but without going into the details, you know, you don't have to share about, I had a bad day because I spilled milk all over my shirt and then my dog ran away from home and then I got into an argument with my spouse and now I'm late for work and now my supervisor's yelling at me. Okay, we don't need to like what Dad says, true. You decide how much you want to share. And so there's this interesting art, and the boundaries are different for everybody too. So it's whatever's within your comfort zone to share. You can share something personal with the intention of connecting with people, but without going into all of the nitty gritty details, because at that point you're just complaining, you know? And then at that point, people end up having that reaction like, oh God, like, I'm so sorry, boo-hoo, poor you, instead of just saying like, oh, me too, you know? And so like that's something helpful that I wanted to share when it comes to being vulnerable. Like you can do it, but it's still in a way where you're respecting like your own personal boundaries. Some other things that I find that are super helpful is that you can share about some of the hard lessons that you've learned. For example, it's like, hey, I had a tough day yesterday, but this is what I did to work through it, and here's the takeaway that I got from that. And so it's because, you know, like it's capturing the human side of growth where it's like, yeah, we all have bad days, but here's what I learned from it. And here's something that I've learned that's of value that I want to share with you. So you're sort of taking something that was potentially weak or potentially vulnerable and then turning it into something that your audience can take away from that. And so suddenly it turns it from like a, oh, poor you, boo-hoo story into like, oh, wow, that's strong. They overcame that. Oh, I struggle with that too. But oh, this is something that they tried and that's something that helped them. Maybe that's something that I can try too. Right. So it's about like taking something that is difficult and then reframing it and then using it as a value and a teaching piece. So that it shows your audience that you're human, and two, still positions you as the expert. It's kind of sneaky when you think about it. You're like, I can show you that I'm human. You can connect with me, but I also have something of value that you can learn from that, and that you inherently change that position from looking weak and then now, oh wow, suddenly you're the expert. And then yeah, like you can also talk about your personal life too, of course, with boundaries, because nobody likes following anybody who only posts about business stuff. And we all know that person, you know, tips and tricks this, I'm the expert this, look at this, promo this, challenge this. And at some point people just tune you out. They're like, you're just a walking billboard. Like, I want to connect with you. I don't just want to hear about what you have to offer. Like, can we just have a conversation? And so I think a lot of it is about having a healthy mix of having personal stuff along with your business stuff, so that people see that human side of you and that they have a point of connection. So they see, oh, what you do for business, it's just a part of what you do because you love it, you're good at it, and that's your life's mission. You want to support people with it, but you're also human. It's like, oh, cool. Like you took your dog out for a walk and then it pooped on some private property and you couldn't pick it up because you would be trespassing, you know, like you could have like these like funny, relatable moments that you can share with your audience. And those are equally just as important as posting up all of these, you know, tips and tricks that you see pasted all over your wall on social media. And so I know I blasted you guys with a lot of stuff. Just give me a few nods to see if you're following along. Everything I'm saying is making sense. Okay, awesome. Yeah, and so I also wanted to emphasize too here that vulnerability, it looks and feels different for everybody. There is no like one stop shop for what vulnerability looks like. Not everyone's got to cry on camera. Not everybody has to be super open and talk about your feelings. And yeah, what Dana says is true. People buy from people they trust and have a connection with. And so you get to have a say in terms of how you define what vulnerability looks and feels like for your brand. Because I know, especially for guys too, there's this societal message that says, oh, guys can't be weak and we can't talk about our feelings, because if we do, then that means that like I'm less manly, you know, whatever society has to say about you. And you can still define vulnerability in a way that doesn't seem weak. You know, you can always reframe it. And so don't ever feel this pressure of other people's judgment whenever you decide to show yourself a certain way. as long as it's honest and in alignment for you, screw what everyone else has to say. Because at the end of the day, it's about your unique relationship with your audience. And that looks different for everybody. You know, what could be helpful for your audience could be different for someone else's. And so because you can gauge the relationship you have with your audience, I would definitely encourage you to sort of just explore and experiment. And I know that there's a lot of things that can get in the way, such as saying like, oh, it's not on brand for me, you know, like I don't do vulnerability. That's totally just not what I do. Like I'm the cool person. That's what people know me for. Some people often say that, or maybe you could just say like, my audience, they're not used to me showing up this way. What if I scare them? What if what if I show vulnerability and they think that I'm cracking, you know, like what if, like we have a lot of these things that we worry about. But I think I wanted to drop in like a few just very helpful questions that I usually ask myself before I decide to share anything. And I'll drop these into the chat after I share it too. And it's sort of like I ask myself these things to double check if it's okay for me to share something. And the first thing is what is my intention for sharing this with my audience? You know, if it is something that's potentially vulnerable, I ask myself first, why am I sharing this? Am I just complaining, or am I trying to create a connection? Right. Usually, even if the answer is, oh, I'm just complaining and I'm looking for sympathy, okay, maybe don't share it. Right. So that's the first background check. And then the second background check is, how can my audience benefit from this share? You know, because the intention of this is to create connection with people. And so outside of just your intention, then you can ask, how can they benefit? Would it be that, oh, one, like they understand, they feel a little less alone, you know, or two, maybe they would get some value from the thing that I just shared. Maybe it was a lesson. Maybe it's actually like a good teaching point, right? And so I'll just copy and paste these two questions into the chat. Usually this is sort of what I use to background check myself before I share anything vulnerable. And I encourage you to write these things down. It sounds simple, but it's something that takes a lot of practice. And I think that for those of you who might feel a little new to this, it might feel weird in the beginning, you know. It's about engaging in a dialogue and a conversation with your audience. And if all else fails, just ask for permission, you know, like you can ask people like, hey, is it okay if I share X, Y, Z? If you're worried, if there's going to be lashback, or if they're going to be uncomfortable, it never hurts to ask for permission. And then it's never too late to start, you know, like even if it's something new, you can tell people, it's like, hey, I realize that I've been doing my thing this whole time and I haven't actually given you an inside look on what the process is. And I'd love to take you guys along on that journey, you know, start showing the process, you know, start showing things before you get to the final product. And it's about bringing people along on the journey together with you. Yes. And so I encourage you guys to try this out. It can be a little weird. It can be a little scary. I'll even share really quickly an instance, even just a few weeks ago, where I was like, I had this borderline instance where I had something happen in my personal life, and I was like, this is a little, I'm used to sharing openly with my audience. I was like, this is a little edgy for me, but you know, I asked myself these questions and it passed my background check. And so I'll share what this instance was. A few weeks ago, I found out that one of my really close friends had passed away. And me being young, this is my first time ever having an experience of losing someone this close to me. And I was not okay. Initially I told myself, it's like, okay, cry it out for 24 hours and then come back to it, you know. But as we know, with grief, it doesn't actually work like that. And I was not okay. I was actually not okay consistently for a very long time. And as you know, when we run our business, there are some moments where you just gotta show up, you know, and it's hard, especially when you're dealing with this on the other side. And so at some point I had to tell people, it's like, okay, guys, so this happened. I am not okay. And I'm going to try my best to continue showing up for you guys. But this is something that I'm working through, you know? And I know that in the world of business, some people would be like, why are you sharing this? And I'm like, the intention of this was to show people, it's like, hey, this is the human side of me, that I am working through something. It might affect the way that I'm showing up for my business, but because I'm dedicated to being here for you guys, I'm going to let you in on what's going on. And I'm going to let you know that I'm going to show up for you anyway. Right. And so I know that, of course, everyone's comfort levels is totally different, but that's something that happened even a few weeks ago. It was interesting. It was new for me to put that out there. But the interesting thing is that I got a lot of amazing responses. I actually got a lot more support than I thought, like from people who were totally just business connections, but a lot of people actually ended up responding, and everyone was like, "Hey, like it's okay. Take time off, please. Get away from your computer. Give yourself the space." And it was the support was actually exactly what I needed, and it gave people an inside view. And when people start reading the comments, they end up giving themselves permission to be like, oh, that means that if I'm not okay, I can also take some space apart for myself, and so it's actually not even just like a between me and my audience thing. As people start commenting on the post or whatever you put out, they it's kind of like the group or herd mentality, where everybody ends up realizing it's like, oh wow, like where I'm sharing, I'm going through something similar, like that's okay, like I have permission to step away, and I'm not alone, and that's honestly what most people need to hear. Yeah, what King says is like, yeah, we connect with each other on an emotional level. Yep, exactly. That's where the real connection happens. And I know that in the world of business, a lot of people, they're always focused on like conversions, like what are the tactics and tips and tricks that work. But the funny thing is there's no substitute for real connection. It's hard because you can't really quantify it. You can't quantify the depth of a connection, but from a conversion standpoint, the more that somebody likes you and trusts you, the more they are willing to go the distance for you. And this doesn't always just even result in money, people will be there for you when you need it. And because business is tough, you're going to need it at every step of the journey. You're going to need people who have your back. You're going to need people who are ready to advocate for you and share about you and your stuff with other people. And so when we are very intentional about cultivating these relationships we have with our customers and our audience, not just with the intention of converting them, it actually comes back tenfold in ways that you can't even quantify. Connections that I built with people in the past, just networking, did a coffee meeting like a few years back. We're still friends to this day, and they still show up for my things. They still support and share my stuff. And it was just because I took a moment to sit and listen to them and be like, hey, I get you. Let's go on this journey together. Right. And so the invitation that I have for you guys is, to find opportunities to do the same thing in your business. It takes a little bit of practice. It's like any new skill, vulnerability takes vulnerability to try it. It's about trying a new thing, being okay with taking the risk of having people not respond in a way that you'd like. But you don't know until you try. And so I know that vulnerability is one of the many things that you can use to connect with your audience. I know that that was just what we talked about today. But at the end of the day, people are tricky. There's no one size fits all solution for how you can connect with your dream customers. But really, it just goes down to three things. One, understand yourself and your brand, know who you are, know where you stand, and know what's authentic for you. Understanding who you're trying to connect with. What do they need? Where are they at? What are they looking for? How can you support them? And understand what kind of relationship you want to be building with them. And that's different for everybody, like some of you work better with a peer-to-peer relationship, buddy, friend. Some of you work better from a mentor-student relationship, that dynamic is also different. A lot of influencers, they have boyfriend girlfriend relationship, it's kind of quasi romantic. You post flirty pictures online, that's a different kind of connection. And so understanding the kind of connection you want to have with your audience, it helps you just make the decisions and navigate how you want to be putting yourself out there and connecting with them. And King says, yeah, if you focus on building a relationship with people, it always pays off in the long run, even if they don't become a client. And yeah, that's true, because just because somebody's not ready to work with you yet, doesn't mean that down the line they might, maybe they know somebody who needs help, right? And so there's always room for it to come back to you, even if it's not like that person right now in this moment ready to give you their wallet. And so yes, before I quickly segue into just a quick question and answer time, I know we have about 15 minutes left here. I did want to say that if any of you are looking for additional support with this, I know it can be tough because sometimes we are so close to ourselves that we have our own blind spots, and we can get caught up in our own personal bias towards ourselves. And you need a little extra support with figuring out, how do I position myself in relation to my audience? That's actually something that I help a lot of my clients with. And so one thing that I like to offer to you guys, if any of you are looking for support, is that I offer free 60-minute brand consultations, where we could just come in and pick my brain. You know, if you've got questions, if you want a sounding board, and if you want to sort of untangle this complicated ball of like, how the hell do I position myself in a not salesy way, but still actually fill my bank with money, you know, like figuring out this really complicated way, a thing called positioning yourself online. I'd be happy to help you guys out with that. I'll drop a link to the consultation in the chat, in the case any of you are interested in that. I totally just copied the part of the link and not all of it. Here's the actual link for real. So feel free to save that. I think Dana's going to send out an email afterwards with this link as well. So if any of you are interested in just having a coffee chat and having somebody to be a sounding board for you, happy to do that for you. And yes, I think that's everything that I had planned for today. I rambled a lot, but I hope that was of value and made sense to you. I would love to sort of open up the floor and see if any of you have questions. You guys can either type it into the chat, or if you are feeling brave and vulnerable enough to ask a question in person and have a conversation, you guys, I guess you could just raise your digital hand or speak up. We could do it popcorn style. So yes, opening up the floor if you guys have got questions. Could be something that you're struggling with, question about anything that I shared. Now's the space to do it. And Dana, let me know if and when we run out of time. So thank you.
First, I'm going to say thank you for this. It was very valuable, and there's a lot of things there. And I think we can all, like listen and say like, oh my God, I'm definitely like this. Oh my God, I don't do this enough. So we all have it. I know that I definitely have it. This is one of my lessons in life, to show more vulnerability, because I can share from my side, you always like, I've been brought up to feel like that I'm always strong, and that I always need, I'll move it to gallery so we can all pretty much see each other. But I was saying like, I was brought up to be like, I'm strong. What do you mean? So you cannot really show that you're weak. Although one day I was really in tears and someone told me a nice sentence. It said, a strong person is a person that knows to say, like, that I'm not strong enough to do certain things, that acknowledge the parts that we're not that strong. And I think if you do it with your business, as the same as you said, and everyone spoke here about the building relationship and everything, I think especially with social media, we feel like that everyone is like, you don't really know them, and you want to get to know them. That's why we love to watch reality shows, right? Because we feel like, oh my God, like I know the person more than they know is himself. So I think it's very important for us to share it. So thank you so much for this topic. I love it.
And thank you for having me. It's so funny. When I was planning this talk, I was like, I know what I'm going to say in the beginning. I'm going to tell people that I'm feeling nervous and scared because this is the first time in a long time that I've done public speaking. But you guys have been amazing. Thank you so much for playing along, responding in the chat as well. I know that this could potentially be a sticky topic. Some people, I think one of the people that I had a conversation with in the past, I did a brand audit for them. And, the feedback that I gave to them was that like, oh, you seem to have tough guy syndrome. First impressions are, it's like the way that you put yourself out there is I'm this like super tough, like sort of tough love sort of character. And then they suddenly got really defensive and they're like, no, I know how to show vulnerability. It's just not part of my brand, and the way that I show it, people might not get it. And I'm like, yeah, that's totally fine. Like, you don't have to get defensive with me. I'm just giving you a reflection of this is how you're coming off. And for people who are looking for help, it might potentially make it hard for them to reach out and talk to you, but and I know that that conversation didn't result in them becoming a client, but I follow them on social, and so even like a few weeks later I noticed that they started making changes to what they were putting out, and they were softening up a little bit. I'm like, okay, score, I still win, still made an impact. And sometimes all it takes is holding a mirror up to somebody and having them look at themselves, and it's like, oh gosh, like that's how I'm coming off. Like, oh, that doesn't actually serve my audience, And so just a cool point of reflection. But yes, not meaning to take up question and answer time. If any of you have questions, could be something that you're struggling with. Doesn't even have to be vulnerability related to. If you guys are having a hard time connecting with your audience, if you feel like you're hitting your head against the wall, if you just want to bounce some ideas with the group, just want to open up the space for that. Lily, I think I saw your finger come up. If you have a question, come on in.
Yes.
And let's chat.
Thank you for sharing this knowledge. It's very valuable. And for example, for me, that I am completely lost in social media and I am not posting as frequently as I would like because I don't know what to show. I don't know what to share. And so I am really lost. So for example, speaking about vulnerability, I don't know what to share and I don't know how much. I say, okay, if I share this, and I am also lost in that part. So if you could share some tips, but that I guess to all the girls that are here are going to help us as well.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And it's scary being seen. I think that's something that is totally not spoken about enough in social media. It's not as simple as just create a post and put it out there. I think especially for women, I don't know what it is, but when you're not feeling fully confident in yourself, it's scary to put yourself out there because it means that people see you and you have no control over what goes on in their head. And that and us imagining what goes on in someone's head is often what holds us back. You're like, oh, what if they think that I look funny? Oh, do I sound funny in this video? Or like, oh, what if what I'm talking about doesn't actually make sense? Oh, what if this, and we what if ourselves into a corner and then we never
You can go further than this, like, oh my God, will they see that I haven't done my eyebrows or that I have a bit of gray hair and I didn't cover? And you can guys laugh, but I do my videos and my dad will sometimes says like, why don't you dye your hair? I was like, how did you even notice? I'm like trying to hide it. I even bought an emergency spray from my friend just in case. So I think we can all resonate as female with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the interesting thing too. And I totally resonate with that. And I think a lot of it goes down to first and foremost, understanding like who's in your audience, and once you know who you're talking to, it's much easier to kind of figure out how you want to be positioning yourself. For example, the way that you're going to talk to your mom is going to be very different from how you talk to your best friend. The things you talk about, the way you talk to them, how frequently you talk to them, it all sort of depends on that. And so if you're feeling sort of stuck with that, I encourage you to sort of take a look at who's in your social media circle. I know each platform might be different too. Yeah, like take a look, even like go into the tab of like who's following me and just scroll through and take a look, because social media, one good way to reframe it is it's a one-to-many relationship. And so when you're putting something out there, generally speaking, that whatever you put out is supposed to be supportive for in general, all of the people that are in your audience. And
Okay.
of course, there will be some random people where it's like just friends and family who are following you to support.
Yes.
That's totally cool. But just to encourage you, just take a look and see like who's in here. And once you kind of get a sense of that, you'll have a better idea of what would be helpful for them to be hearing from you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions and or comments? I know that building a connection with your audience, it sounds simple, but it can be quite complicated. So yeah, if anyone else has anything,
Yeah, I'll hop in with a question. Like it's, like vulnerability when you share, I struggle with always kind of hopping between what is oversharing and what isn't. Because when you go into even a single like thing you want to share, something vulnerable, maybe it's a rejection or something, but then you need context, and like context matters in any case. But how do you gauge between sharing too much and sharing enough? Because I feel like there are times I'm sharing on social media and I don't have enough context, and I might go through like cycles of self-doubt. Like, am I sharing enough? Do they understand where I'm coming from? Am I coming off as complaining? Or if I add too much context, it's like, okay, now it feels way longer than I initially expected it to be. And I find that struggle where that in between of finding that balance of like sharing enough so that people understand what you're going through and doing it in the right intention, but at the same time, not giving enough and not doing too much of it.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I often find that it's helpful to, sometimes we almost feel like we need to repeat ourselves because, for example, if you post up a story, you're sharing something and it's a 24-hour window. So not everyone's going to catch it in that. But let's say it's something that's ongoing for you, and a few days later, you're still struggling with the same thing. So you hop on your story and you start sharing it. And I think it just goes down to the awareness of understanding like, oh, hey, I recognize that not everyone's going to know what I'm talking about here. So sometimes you have to almost repeat yourself and be like, okay, hey guys, for example, I'm still struggling with that thing. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, a few days ago, I actually shared about how I'm struggling through this and this is what I'm doing. And so it's almost like if you ever watch TV episodes where they have that recap at the very beginning, it's like on last episode, like this is what a quick recap. That's something that's helpful if it's like an ongoing thing. But let's say if you're catching up with somebody and they ask you a big question and it's deceptively simple question, but you're like, that's a simple question with a very complicated answer, and you're trying to like share with them without like sharing too much. It's like you take up 45 minutes of a 1-hour conversation just trying to answer their question. And so I feel like that's where it's helpful to sort of do a little bit of background work before you get into certain conversations. So you sort of prepare before you start sharing. So for example, if you're having like a get to know you call with someone for the first time, and for sure they're going to ask you, so tell me about your story, tell me about you, what do you do, and like and some for sure questions that they're going to ask, you can do some prep work on the behind the scenes and be like, okay, here are the main things that are important for them to know to get an understanding of who I am, and these are some of the things that are a lot of important details, but it's not relevant for the context that they need to hear from me right now. For example, like I know a lot of you guys know me as like I'm a personal brand coach. I help people with branding and I have a design background. Those are all relevant, but the other irrelevant details that I could share about myself, but I've taken away, is I also worked at an animal hospital for 3 years before that. I grew up in church for 20 years before that. Some of these details, it's totally a part of my identity, but it's not relevant for the current conversation, if that sort of makes sense. So it's not like you're intentionally censoring or hiding, but it's just about keeping it focused so that they get the information that they need within the context of that conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, Ari, you wanna? Yes, totally. I would be happy to do a quick recap of our talk. I know we went through a lot of things. And so Today, we sort of started off talking about the definition of vulnerability. And I sort of presented, there were two definitions of vulnerability. The Google version of it, where it just talked about how scary it is. And we talked about Brene Brown's definition of vulnerability, where we talk about, yes, it is scary, but it requires courage. And courage is a good quality for us to be having. So after we talked about what the definition of vulnerability is, we talked about what often gets in the way of us showing vulnerability. And we listed a whole bunch of things such as like facing rejection, experiencing shame, feeling guilt, just all of the things that make you feel like you're not enough. We also talked about the business equivalent of that and how it translates into us being called unprofessional and basically not earning money, which is scary for a business. And then we sort of talked about how, on the flip side, how we can apply it to our business in a very helpful way is to help our clients feel like they're understood. That's sort of like the bottom line. No matter whatever the heck how you do it, as long as they walk away feeling like, oh my God, they get me, I feel safe, it's okay if I open up, that's sort of the bottom line when it comes to business. And so oftentimes the opposite of that in the world of business is that we tend to present ourselves as perfect, like we are the expert, we know everything. And we make ourselves so big that people are scared to approach us. And that's sort of like a no-no if you are looking to build a connection with your audience. And so we sort of talked about the flip side of that, what it looks like when people don't show vulnerability in business. And then we sort of talked about a few ideas of what showing vulnerability can look like. And so some of the ideas that I shared was, like share the process, show your work, essentially. Even if you don't have the final product, just show your work, bring people on the journey with you, show up even on the hard days, know what is personal and private for you, understand the difference, know where your boundaries are, and share within what's comfortable for you. And also we talked about, I'm even going through my notes here. Yes, and then I sort of landed it with two questions that I usually ask myself before I share anything, just to do a background check. And those two questions were, what is my intention for sharing this? And then the second one is, how can my audience benefit from this share? Yes, and that's basically it. I do see a question here from Vincent. So just wondering, is it necessary to wait for the social cues to share vulnerably? Good question. And do you have any comment to be the first person in the circle to share? That is a great question. Just checking in with Dana. Do we still have a little bit of time for me to answer this question before we pop off?
Yes, and if they have the patience, so you've got as much time as you want.
Okay, amazing. I'll quickly address this because I think it's actually a really important question. Like, what if you're the first one to share? What if everyone in your circle is just like, haha, I'm so great, like I'm perfect, and you want to like break down that wall? It's like, hey guys, can we just be real for a second? That is scary, and I actually think that it's okay to be the first one to share. And even if people don't ask, I think it's okay. Sorry, there's a garbage truck going by. I'm taking this call outside. Pardon if you hear the weird sounds in the background. But yes, it's actually okay to be the first one to start. And because if you're not going to do it, I don't think they are too. That's the unfortunate truth. Because now that you have the awareness, it is kind of your responsibility to say, even like, hey guys, is it okay if I share something personal with you? Is it okay if I talk about something hard? And asking for permission first is always like the best way to lead in, because they also sound really bad if they're like, oh no, please don't share. I don't want to talk. I don't want you to hear about what's going on in your life. I don't care. I'm sorry. I don't think those would be very good friends anyway. And so I would definitely say, if all else fails, you're not sure, but you want to break the ice, just bring it up. You know, it's like, hey guys, I've actually got something going on in my life. I would love to share it with you. Is it okay if I talk about it? You know, ask for permission, wait for them to give you the green light, and then just go for it. I hope that answered your question. I know it's definitely really scary. It's awesome that you're even just thinking about it. And who knows, maybe like once the first person goes, then the next person, then the next person. It's just everyone's waiting for permission. And we often don't realize like you need to give yourself that permission. No one's going to give it to you. And if you're the first person who leads by example, who knows, maybe other people would be like, oh, wow, like that was brave. Like I'm struggling with something and I've been holding it inside for myself for this long. And if he did it, I can do it too, you know, especially when a guy is vulnerable first. That is something that's really powerful. I just got to put that out there for like the guys in this room. It's really powerful when a guy steps up and is like, hey, I'm actually struggling with something and I want to talk about it. Like all the girls in the room will be like, oh my God, like you're my hero. But yes, don't be afraid to start. Somebody's got to lead by example. Yes, okay, yes, exactly. Be the permission slip for others by sharing first. And so, yeah, that was a great question though, Vincent. I know even I have a circle of friends too where they're like, nobody talks about their problems, even with my family, you know, there's still some things that we're working through on the back end. But yes, that was an awesome question. I know we're a little over time, but I guess if anyone else has questions, feel free to pop them in. But if not, I'll let Dana wrap this up.